The first thing I registered was not the man himself, but the silence that entered the room with him. It was a specific quality of quiet, not an absence of sound but a presence. It had weight. The low hum of the archive's climate control, the rustle of my own sleeves against the acid-free paper, the distant sigh of traffic 40 floors below. All of it seemed to fall away, absorbed into the stillness he carried like a cloak. I didn't look up. Not at first. I had been hired to catalog a collection, not to interact with its owner. My focus was on the book in my hands, a 17th-century treatise on celestial navigation, its vellum cover worn smooth as river stone. I told myself my world was this table, this pool of amber light, this careful task. I told myself the man standing somewhere behind me, whose presence had just rerouted the very atmosphere of the room, was irrelevant. I knew, even as I thought it, that I was lying. 3 days I had been here, in this penthouse that felt less like a home and more like the curated wing of a private museum. 3 days of silence, punctuated only by the quiet appearances of a woman named Mrs. Cha, who brought me trays of food I hadn't ordered and tea I didn't know I wanted. I had not seen him, the owner, Mr. Kwan, until now. I counted to 10 in my head, a small, useless habit for imposing order on disorder. My hands, usually so steady, felt suddenly large and clumsy on the delicate page. I was acutely aware of my own body, of the space I took up. A woman my size learns to make herself small, to fold inward, to apologize for her own square footage in the world. I had perfected the art of invisibility. It was a skill that had served me well. But you cannot be invisible when you are the only other person in a silent room. Finally, I placed a slip of archival paper between the pages and closed the book. The soft thud of the cover felt like a surrender. I turned on my stool, my movements measured, and looked at him. He was younger than I'd expected. Not a boy, but a man who wore his authority with an unnerving lack of performance. He stood by the enormous window, a silhouette against the bruised gold of the late afternoon sky over Seoul. The city sprawled below us, a vast, indifferent circuit board of light and motion. He wore a dark suit, tailored with the kind of precision that costs more than my car. He wasn't looking at the city. He was looking at me. His face was a study in planes and angles, still and unreadable. There was no welcome in his expression, but no hostility either. It was a terrifying neutrality. He said, "You are Ilara." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, as if he were confirming an entry in a ledger. "Yes," I replied. My voice sounded thin. He held my gaze for 2 seconds longer than the conversation required. It was a form of pressure, a quiet assertion of dominance. I felt a familiar, unwelcome heat rise in my face. I hated it. I hated the way my body betrayed my composure. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then his eyes moved to the book on the table. De Spira Mundi. His pronunciation was perfect. He knows it, I thought. Of course he does. He probably knows every book in this library. He took 3 silent steps toward the table. The room seemed to reorganize itself around his movement. I stayed on my stool, resisting the urge to stand, to shrink. This was my space. This little island of light was mine. For now. This one, he said, his voice quiet, almost a murmur, is a forgery. A very good one. The binding is from 1688. The paper is Genoese, correct for the period. But the ink has trace amounts of synthetic indigo. It wasn't used until the 1880s. I stared at him. I had been studying the book for 6 hours. I had noted the binding, the watermark on the paper. I had been about to certify it as authentic. I felt a flush of professional humiliation, hot and sharp. "How did you know?" The question was out before I could stop it. He looked at me again, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something shift in his eyes. It wasn't a smile. It was an almost smile, a ghost of an expression that was there and then gone before it could be confirmed. My predecessor told me. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving the silence to settle back into its old shape. Only now it was different. It was filled with him. I sat there for a long time, my hands resting on a book that was a perfect lie. I felt seen. And I felt More than anything, a profound and unfamiliar sense of danger. It had nothing to do with the 40-story drop outside the window. It was all right here in the room with me. The week that followed was a lesson in his particular language. It was a language of objects and arrangements, of things done and not said. A new lamp appeared on my table, its light a softer, warmer amber. The jasmine tea I had idly mentioned to Mrs. Cha became a permanent fixture on my afternoon tray, served in a celadone cup that was itself a work of art. One evening, as I was packing up, I saw him at the far end of the long gallery that connected the library to the main living area. He was speaking to a man I recognized from the periphery of my first day, a severe-looking man in a dark suit who seemed to be his head of security. The man's name, I had learned from a brief, clipped introduction, was Min. Mr. Kwan spoke in a low voice, his back to me, but his posture was rigid. Min listened, his head bowed slightly. A transfer of information, an order given. Then Min glanced over his shoulder, his eyes sweeping past me, lingering for a barest second before he nodded to Mr. Kwan and departed. The moment was over in less than a minute, but it left an imprint on the air, a feeling of immense, coiled power. I told myself it was none of my business. I was a contractor. I was here to do a job. His world, whatever it was, ran on its own tracks, entirely separate from mine. I was just a temporary passenger on a siding. I kept my head down. I worked. I counted the books. I measured the spines. I noted the watermarks and the provenance. The obsessive precision of the work was a comfort. It was real. It was tangible. I could control it. I could not control the way my stomach tightened every time I heard the whisper of his shoes on the polished floorboards outside the library door. He rarely came in, but I knew when he was near, the silence would change its density. One afternoon, a package arrived for me. It was a flat, rectangular box, wrapped in simple brown paper. There was no note. I opened it to find a first edition of a book on medieval cartography I had been searching for years for my own small collection. It was a rare, almost impossible find. It was also ruinously expensive. My breath caught. I looked up, my eyes scanning the empty doorway of the library. He was nowhere to be seen. But he was there. The gesture was there. Felt like a brand. I couldn't accept it. It was too much. It was a debt I could not repay and did not want to incur. I spent the rest of the day in a state of low-grade panic, the book sitting on the corner of my table like a quiet accusation. When it was time to leave, I wrapped it back up and carried it with me, my knuckles white around the string. I found him in his study, a room of dark wood and glass that overlooked the Han River. He was standing by the window, much like the first time I'd seen him, watching the lights of the city begin to bloom in the twilight. He didn't turn when I entered. "You came." Again, the statement. "I can't accept this," I said, my voice tight. I held out the package. He turned slowly. His face was shadowed, the light from the city catching the sharp line of his jaw. He looked at the book, then at me. "It is a gift. It's too much. It's inappropriate. I'm your employee." I felt a surge of something like courage. I would not be managed by expensive gifts. I would not be bought. "You are not my employee," he said, his voice still quiet, but with a new edge of iron in it. "You are a specialist contracted for a service. There is a difference. Then it's even more inappropriate." I placed the book on the edge of his vast, empty desk. For a long moment he just looked at me. The silence stretched, thin and humming. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. I felt my resolve beginning to fray under the weight of his gaze. I had made a mistake. I should have just left it. I should have pretended it never arrived. He walked from the window to the desk, his movements economical and deliberate. He didn't look at the book. He looked at me. "The ink," he said. "Tell me about the ink." The sudden shift in topic threw me. "What? The ink in the forgery. The synthetic indigo. How is it made?" I blinked. "It's a process involving aniline, derived from coal tar. It was first synthesized by Adolphe von Baer in 1878. It became commercially viable a few years later." The words came out automatically, a reflex from years of study. He nodded, a slow, thoughtful gesture. I see. He picked up the book from his desk. He held it not like a treasure, but like an object, a tool. Then this, he said, is not a gift. It is a resource for your work. He held it out to me. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but I understood. He had given me an out. He had reframed it, allowed me to save face. It was a gesture of unexpected, almost clinical grace. My hand trembled slightly as I took it. My fingers brushed his. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt through me, sharp and startling as static electricity. Thank you, I whispered. He gave that almost imperceptible nod again. And for the first time I felt something other than fear. It was a sliver of reluctant warmth, a dangerous, unfamiliar thing. I left his study with the book held tight against my chest. That was my second mistake, though I didn't know it yet. The first had been agreeing to the job. The second was accepting the book. The third was still to come. December arrived, dusting the city in a fine, crystalline layer of frost. The air in the penthouse was always the same temperature, a steady 22 degrees Celsius, but I could feel the cold seeping in through the vast panes of glass. I had been there for 6 weeks. My work was progressing. I had fallen into a rhythm, a strange domesticity that felt both comfortable and deeply unsettling. I had my table, my lamp, my tea. Mrs. Cha would sometimes leave a small bowl of tangerines for me, their bright orange skins a cheerful punctuation in the muted tones of the library. I had not spoken to Mr. Kwan again since the incident with the book. I saw him occasionally, a fleeting presence in a corridor, a still figure at the end of a room. Our interactions were limited to brief nods. But the silence between us had changed. It was no longer empty. It was charged with the memory of that moment in his study, the brush of our fingers, the quiet intensity of his gaze. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was a product of the isolation, of spending my days in a silent library 40 stories above the world. I had a phone call with my friend Lena one evening, huddled in the alcove by the service elevator where I felt I could speak freely. You've been there over a month, Alara, she said, her voice a welcome blast of normalcy. And you've barely spoken to the guy? That's weird. He's a private person, I said, the excuse sounding thin even to my own ears. He's letting me do my work. A private person who sends a car for you every morning and has a personal chef making you lunch? A private person who buys you impossible-to-find antique books? That's not private, that's possessive. It's not like that. I insisted a little too quickly. It's just efficiency. He wants the job done well. Lena was silent for a moment. Then she said, softly, just be careful, okay? Guys like that, they don't do things for no reason. There's always a price. I hung up the phone feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the December air. Lena was right, of course. There was always a price. I just didn't know what it was yet. The next day, he was in the library when I arrived. He was standing in front of a section of shelves I hadn't reached yet, his back to me. He was holding a slim volume bound in dark green leather. I stopped in the doorway, my heart giving a sudden, hard thump against my ribs. I should have made a sound, cleared my throat, announced my presence. But I didn't. I just watched him. He traced the gold tooling on the spine with one long finger, a gesture of surprising gentleness. Then he turned, as if he had sensed me there all along. He didn't seem startled. He never seemed startled. He held up the book. Lee Sang, he said, the poet. I nodded. His work is difficult. Yes. He looked down at the book, then back at me. His eyes were very dark. He said he wrote about mirrors and loneliness, about being trapped. He understood the architecture of despair. The observation was so unexpected, so incisive, that I was momentarily speechless. It was the first time he had offered a piece of himself, a thought, an opinion that wasn't a statement of fact or a command. I found my voice. He also wrote about wings, about the desire to fly even if it's just in your head. A flicker of something passed through his expression. That almost smile again, closer to the surface this time. It was like watching the sun try to break through a wall of cloud. It was there and then it was gone. Yes, he said. He did. He held the book out to me, not as a gift, just holding it, a shared object between us. I took it. Our fingers brushed again. This time I was prepared for it, or I thought I was. The jolt was still there, but it was different, slower, a low, humming current instead of a sharp spark. I looked down at the book in my hands. I will add it to the catalog, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't reply. When I looked up, he was watching me, his gaze intense. Felt like he was reading me, not the book. Like he was cataloging the faint tremor in my hand, the slight flush on my skin. He was taking inventory. The silence stretched. It was a different kind of silence now. Not pressure, not tension. Something else. Something that felt dangerously like intimacy. He broke it. His voice was low. You have a smudge. On your cheek. Ink. Instinctively, my hand flew to my face. Here? He took a step closer. The space between us shrank. My breath hitched. He was so close I could smell the faint, clean scent of his shirt. Something like crisp linen and cold air. No, he said softly. He lifted his hand. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to touch me. I froze, my entire body rigid. But he didn't. His fingers hovered an inch from my skin. There. My eyes were locked on his. I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the almost invisible scar that bisected his left eyebrow. His own gaze was fixed on the spot by my cheekbone. I watched his throat move as he swallowed. It was the first crack I had ever seen in his perfect composure. It made him suddenly, terrifyingly human. Then he lowered his hand. His expression was shuttered again, the mask of cool neutrality back in place. He stepped back, restoring the safe distance between us. He gave a curt nod. And then he was gone. I stood there for I don't know how long, the book of poetry clutched in my hand. I finally lifted my other hand to my cheek. My skin was burning. I walked over to a polished display case and looked at my reflection. There was no smudge. There was no ink. There was nothing. Just me, my face flushed, my eyes wide with a feeling I refused to name. The rhythm of my days was broken by a message. Came on a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesday was the day Mrs. Cha made a specific kind of noodle soup, the steam fragrant with ginger and star anise. I was on my lunch break, scrolling through my phone, a brief dip into my old, ordinary life. And then I saw it. A message from a number I didn't recognize. The text was simple. I know where you are. My blood ran cold. I scrolled up. The previous message from this number was from 4 months ago. A single, venomous sentence I had tried to forget. I know what you did. Marcus. It was my ex-boyfriend's creditor. A man whose face I had only seen once, but whose voice, low and slick with menace, was seared into my memory. After I'd left Daniel, after I'd finally scraped together the courage to pack a bag and walk away from the wreckage of his lies and his debts, Marcus had started calling. He believed I knew where Daniel was. He believed I had Daniel's money. Both of those were untrue. For months, I had lived in a state of hypervigilance, looking over my shoulder, my stomach in a perpetual knot of fear. Eventually, the calls had stopped. I had allowed myself to believe he had given up. I told myself I was safe. I was wrong. I know where you are. The words pulsed on the screen. He knew I was here, in this glass tower, this fortress of quiet luxury. How? I felt a wave of nausea. I had been so careful. I had told no one except Lena my new work address, and even her I'd only told the firm's name, not the specifics. A cold dread washed over me. I had brought my past, my mess, my danger, into this meticulously ordered world. I felt like a contaminant. I tried to work. I went back to the library, to the solid, reassuring presence of the books. But I couldn't focus. The elegant script on the page blurred. My hands trembled. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, made me jump. I kept glancing at the door, expecting to see a shadow fall across it. I imagined Marcus, with his cheap suit and his cruel eyes, walking into the serene space. The thought was a violation. I felt a desperate need to protect this place from him, from my own history. At precisely 5 o'clock, I packed my bag. My movements were jerky, clumsy. I dropped a pen and it skittered across the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. I had to get out. I needed to go home to my small, anonymous apartment, lock the door, and hide. As I walked down the long gallery, my footsteps echoing, I saw him, Mr. Kwan. He was standing with Min by the elevators, the private ones that went directly to the garage. He was in the middle of speaking, but he stopped when he saw me. He looked at me, and his eyes narrowed slightly. That unervingly perceptive gaze swept over my face, my posture, the way I clutched my bag. He knew. Of course he knew. He knew something was wrong. I tried to arrange my face into a neutral expression. I gave a quick, jerky nod and headed for the service elevator I always used. "You are leaving early," he said. His voice cut through the air, stopping me in my tracks. It was 11 minutes early. I turned. "I'm not feeling well." My voice was thin, unconvincing. "I'm fine," I added, the reflexive lie falling from my lips before I could stop it. It was the wall I threw up whenever anyone got too close to the truth, to the mess. He didn't respond. He just watched me. Min stood beside him, utterly still, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. The silence was excruciating. It was an interrogating silence. "Are you in trouble?" The question was quiet, direct. It was a question that cost him something to ask. It was a breach of his own carefully constructed wall of detachment. It was an admission that he saw me, that he was concerned. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Because I couldn't let him be. I couldn't drag him into my chaos. I couldn't bear the thought of his world, so clean and controlled, being dirted by mine. "No," I said, my voice firmer this time. "I'm fine. Just a headache. I am perfectly fine." I held his gaze for a beat, trying to project a confidence I did not feel. I was lying, and we both knew it. I could see it in the slight tightening of his jaw. He knew I was lying, and he was letting me. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Min will see you home." It was not an offer. It was a command. "No, thank you," I said, my fierce, stupid independence rising up. "I can get myself home. I will not be handled." The words were sharper than I intended. A flicker of something cold and hard passed through his eyes. "This is not a request," he said, his voice dropping even lower, the quiet making it more, not less, menacing. "Min will drive you." He turned away then, a clear dismissal, and stepped into his private elevator without another word. The doors slid shut, leaving me alone in the gallery with Min's face was, as always, a blank mask. He simply inclined his head toward the other set of elevator doors. "The car is waiting." There was no arguing. I had been overruled. As I rode down to the garage in a silence that was even more dense and uncomfortable than Mr. Kwan's, I felt a warring sense of fury and a strange, shameful relief. I was being managed, and a small, terrified part of me was grateful for it. The drive to my apartment was silent. Min drove with an unnerving smoothness, navigating the congested Seoul streets without a single wasted motion. When we pulled up outside my nondescript building, he didn't immediately unlock the doors. He just sat there, the engine humming. He looked at my building, his eyes scanning the windows, the street, the alleyway next to it. He was assessing. He was looking for threats. Then he turned his head and looked at me. His expression was still blank, but his eyes were sharp. "Stay inside tonight," he said. It was the first full sentence he had ever spoken to me. It was an order disguised as advice. Then the locks clicked open. I got out of the car without a word and hurried into my building, the feeling of being watched heavy on my back. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew he would wait until I was safely inside. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was no longer just about a job. The next 3 days were a study in controlled paranoia. I worked from home. A message had appeared on my laptop screen the morning after Min drove me home, a simple directive from Mr. Kwan's office. "You will continue your work remotely until further notice." A courier will deliver the necessary materials. I told myself it was because of my headache. I told myself it was a courtesy. I knew I was lying to myself again. He was keeping me away from the office. He was keeping me safe. The thought was both suffocating and strangely comforting. The materials arrived via a silent courier who handed me a heavily insured case and left without a word. Inside were not just books, but high-resolution digital scans of entire volumes, a portable document scanner of impossible quality, and a new laptop. He had, in effect, moved a section of his library into my tiny apartment. I tried to lose myself in the work, but the fear was a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. My phone remained silent. No more messages from Marcus. But the silence was not reassuring. It was the silence of a predator gathering itself to strike. I became a prisoner in my own home. I watched the street from my window, my heart lurching every time a man in a dark coat paused too long on the corner. I replayed Lena's words in my head. Guys like that, there's always a price. I was beginning to understand that the price wasn't a book. The price was this gilded cage, this protective custody I hadn't asked for. On the third evening, I couldn't stand it anymore. The walls of my apartment were closing in. I needed air. I needed to feel the cold night on my skin. I needed to reclaim a shred of my own autonomy. It was just after 9. I pulled on a coat, my movements furtive, and slipped out of my building. I walked. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. The city felt alien, hostile. Every footstep behind me sounded like a threat. I walked for 10 minutes, my breath pluming in the frigid air, before I realized I was being followed. It wasn't a feeling. It was a fact. A dark sedan moving slowly, keeping pace with me a half-block behind. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't Min's car. I ducked into a 24-hour convenience store, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pretended to browse the aisles, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold a bottle of water. I glanced out the plate glass window. The sedan was parked across the street, its engine running. A man was in the driver's seat, his face obscured by shadow. I was trapped. I fumbled for my phone, my mind racing. Who do I call? The police? What would I say? The car is following me? They wouldn't take it seriously. I scrolled through my contacts. Lena, my landlord, and then his name, Kwan. I hadn't put it in my phone. It had been added remotely, I now realized, probably when the new laptop was configured. Just his surname. A stark, powerful word on my screen. My thumb hovered over it. Calling him felt like a final surrender. It was admitting I couldn't handle it. It was running to the very person whose protection felt like a cage. A movement outside caught my eye. A man got out of the passenger side of the sedan. It was him, Marcus. Even in the flickering neon light, I recognized his swagger, the cruel set of his mouth. He started walking towards the store. Panic, stark and absolute, seized me. My finger pressed the screen. It rang twice. A voice answered. Not his. Min's. His tone was flat, devoid of emotion. Yes, he's here, I choked out, my voice a strangled whisper. Outside the convenience store on Dehakaro. He's coming in. There was a pause. Not of confusion. It was the pause of a system activating. Where is the car? Min's voice was sharp, clinical. I don't know, I whispered. I walked. The line went silent, but he didn't hang up. I could hear a faint, distorted sound, like a voice speaking quickly in the background. Then Min's voice was back in my ear, impossibly calm. Go to the back of the store. The stockroom. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone. We are 5 minutes away. Before I could ask, the line went dead. Marcus was at the door. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the water bottle and ran. I scrambled past a startled cashier, shoved my way through the swinging doors to the stockroom, and threw my weight against the door. I fumbled with the bolt, my fingers numb and clumsy. I slid it home just as the handle on the other side began to turn. Then the pounding started. Ilara, Marcus's voice, muffled but unmistakable. Open the door. I just want to talk. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my forehead against the cold metal of the door. I didn't make a sound. I just counted. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pounding grew more violent. Don't make this difficult, Alara. I know you're in there. I could hear the cashier shouting something in the background. I just kept counting. The 5 minutes Min had promised stretched into an eternity. 288 seconds. 289. 290. Suddenly, the pounding stopped. I heard a muffled shout from the main store. A crash. The sound of breaking glass. Then silence. A different kind of silence. Not the heavy, atmospheric quiet of the penthouse. This was an absolute dead silence. The aftermath. I stayed frozen, my ear pressed to the door, for what felt like a lifetime. I counted another 120 seconds of perfect, unbroken quiet. Then, a soft knock on the door. 3 distinct taps. Not Marcus's frantic pounding. This was calm, measured. My hand shook as I reached for the bolt. I slid it back and pulled the door open a crack. Min was standing there. His suit was immaculate. His face was impassive. There was no one else in the store. The cashier was gone. The shelves were in disarray. A pyramid of ramen cups toppled over. But there was no sign of Marcus. No sign of a struggle. It was as if he had simply been erased. Min looked at me. His eyes were cold and clear. "It is handled," he said. He looked past me into the storeroom. "He is here." My heart stopped. He appeared around Min's shoulder. And I saw him. Mr. Kwan was standing in the middle of the convenience store, surrounded by the mess of fallen noodle cups and scattered magazines. He was not wearing a suit. He was in dark trousers and a simple black cashmere sweater. He looked utterly out of place, and yet he commanded the space completely. He was looking at me. His face was a mask of cold fury. It was not directed at me. It was a fury on my behalf. And that was the most terrifying and breathtaking thing I had ever seen. He took a step toward me, and the world tilted on its axis. He walked toward me, his steps silent on the debris-strewn floor. The mess, the overturned shelves, the lingering scent of fear. It all seemed to fade into the background. The only thing that was real was the path he cut through the chaos, straight to me. I was still standing in the doorway of the stockroom, clutching the metal frame like a life raft. My body was trembling, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline and the terror. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes scanned my face, my trembling hands, my rumpled coat. He looked at me for a long, silent moment. I felt stripped bare under his gaze. All my carefully constructed walls turned to dust. I expected anger. I expected an "I told you so." I expected a cold lecture about my recklessness. I got none of those things. He said my name. Alara. Just that. My name, spoken in his low, quiet voice, was not a question or a command. It was an anchor, and I finally broke. A single, hot tear escaped and slid down my cheek. I swiped at it angrily. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I'm so sorry. I brought this to you. I put you in danger." He took the final step, closing the distance between us. He was so close now, I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I flinched, expecting him to recoil from the mess I had made, from the weakness I was showing. Instead, he lifted his hand. It was the same gesture as in the library, slow and deliberate. But this time he didn't stop. His fingers, warm and firm, came to rest against my jaw. He tilted my head up, forcing me to meet his eyes. His thumb gently wiped away the tear track on my cheek. The gesture was so tender, so exquisitely gentle, it shattered me. "This is not your fault," he said. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the hand that held my face. "This is mine." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "He is gone," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "He will not trouble you again." The finality in his tone was absolute. It was the sound of a door being slammed shut and locked forever. I didn't ask what gone meant. I didn't want to know. I didn't need to know. I could feel the truth of it in the weight of his hand on my skin. The threat had been erased from my life as cleanly as if it had never existed. A wave of light-headed relief washed over me, so potent it made me sway. His other hand came up, steadying me at my waist. I was leaning against him now, my hands pressed flat against the soft cashmere of his sweater. I could feel the solid, unyielding strength of his chest. Felt like the safest place in the world. I should have been horrified. I should have been repulsed by the casual, terrifying display of power, by the violence that was implied in every calm word he spoke. A man had just been disappeared from the world on my behalf. But all I felt was a profound, bone-deep gratitude. He had stepped into my chaos and simply ended it. Why? I whispered, my voice muffled against his chest. Why would you do this? He was silent for a moment. I could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath my ear. Then he said, a simple, unadorned truth because he frightened you. I pulled back enough to look at him. His face was still unreadable, but his eyes held a raw intensity one had never seen before. I saw the protectiveness, the possessiveness Lena had warned me about. But it wasn't cold or controlling. It was fierce. It was absolute. And it was all for me. A sob of delayed shock and overwhelming emotion caught in my throat. I'm not the kind of woman men like you protect. I managed to get out, the old, familiar insecurity surfacing. I'm too much. I'm not delicate. I'm not small. My voice dropped to a whisper. The shameful, secret belief I had carried for years. No man wants a girl my size. The air crackled with the admission. I had spoken the ugliest thought in my head aloud to the most powerful man I had ever met. I braced myself for the flicker of pity, of polite disagreement, of dismissal. He did none of those things. His expression didn't change, but a fire lit in the depths of his dark eyes. He held my gaze, his grip on my jaw firm, demanding my attention. He stood up a little straighter, a subtle shift that somehow made him seem to fill the entire room. And then he said two words, not with a boast or a swagger, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty of a man stating a law of physics. Watch me. The two words hung in the air between us, dong and final. Watch me. It wasn't a challenge. It was a promise, a declaration of intent. In that moment, standing in the wreckage of a convenience store, with his hand on my face and his body shielding mine, the world rearranged itself. My old insecurities, the ones that had defined the space I allowed myself to occupy, seemed trivial, foolish. He didn't see me as too much, he simply saw me. And he had chosen me. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. I just looked at him, my heart doing a slow, painful turn in my chest. He held my gaze for a few more seconds, then his eyes dropped to my mouth. The air grew thick, heavy. I saw the question in his eyes. He was not a man who would take without permission. Even now, after everything, he was waiting. He was giving me the choice. And I realized, with a sudden, shocking clarity, that I had been choosing him all along. In every small act of defiance, in every moment I pushed back against his control, I was testing the bars of the cage, only to find that the door had been open the entire time. He wasn't trying to keep me. He was trying to keep me safe so that I could choose to stay. I leaned in a fraction of an inch. It was all the answer he needed. He closed the remaining distance and his mouth met mine. The kiss was not what I expected. It wasn't rough or demanding. It was like him. Quiet, deliberate, and overwhelming. It was a kiss of immense, restrained power, a confirmation of the promise he had just made. It was the taste of safety and danger all at once. It ended as quietly as it began. He pulled back slowly, his forehead resting against mine. His breath was warm on my skin. I kept my eyes closed, savoring the feeling of his hands still framing my face. We stood like that for a long time, in the bubble of silence Min had created around us. Eventually, I heard Min's voice, low and discreet, from the doorway. Sir, the car is ready. Jinwoo, and my mind snagged on his first name, a name I had never dared to think. Didn't move. He just breathed. Then, he straightened up, his hands dropping from my face to my arms, holding me gently. Let's go home, he said. Home. He meant the penthouse. the glass tower. And for the first time, it didn't sound like a prison. It sounded like a sanctuary. He kept a light hand on my back as we walked out of the store. A different black car was idling at the curb, this one sleek and anonymous. Min held the door open. The street was quiet. There was no sign of Marcus's sedan. No sign that anything had ever happened. The city was indifferent, just as it always was from his window. As we drove through the sleeping streets, I sat beside him in the plush leather interior, not touching, but hyper-aware of the inches that separated us. I looked at his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the stillness of his hands resting on his knee. He was a man who moved in a world of shadows and quiet violence. A man who could erase other men. And he had turned all of that terrifying power into a shield for me. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But it was a new kind of fear. It was the fear of falling from a great height, not because you were pushed, but because you jumped. When we arrived back at the penthouse, Mrs. Cha was waiting, her face etched with a quiet concern that softened the moment she saw us. She bustled forward and took my coat, her hands warm and dry. She pressed a cup of hot barley tea into my hands without a word. It was a gesture of profound, uncomplicated care. Jin-woo watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at me. "You should rest." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I turned to go to the guest suite that had been my room for weeks. "My room," he said, his voice stopping me. His eyes held mine. It was a question, an invitation, and a statement all in one. My heart gave a single, hard beat. I didn't hesitate. I walked with him down the long, silent gallery toward his private wing, my hand clutching the warm teacup like an anchor in a turning tide. I was walking into the heart of the storm, and I was doing it with my eyes wide open. The weeks that followed were like learning a new language, one spoken not in words but in proximity and gesture. The geography of the penthouse changed. The invisible line that had separated my workspace from his life dissolved. I no longer worked in the library. I worked at a large mahogany desk that Min had silently installed in a corner of his study. We would spend hours in that room together, me with my books and scans, him with his endless stream of encrypted communications and quiet phone calls in languages I didn't understand. The silence between us was different now. It was a shared silence, comfortable and deep. It was the silence of two people existing in the same space, their orbits finally aligned. Sometimes I would look up and find him watching me, his chin resting on his hand, his expression thoughtful. He would just hold my gaze, and in that look, I would feel the weight of his promise. Watch me. He never spoke of Marcus again. The incident was a closed book, a story with its final chapter written in invisible ink. But the effects of it lingered. The hypervigilance I had lived with for so long began to recede. I stopped checking over my shoulder. I stopped jumping at sudden noises. The knot of fear in my stomach, a companion for years, slowly, almost imperceptibly, unwound. He had not just removed the threat, he had removed the fear of it. It was the greatest gift he could have given me. His care continued to manifest in quiet, practical ways. He learned my habits. He knew I liked to read by the window in the morning, and a comfortable chair appeared there. He noticed I struggled with the glare on my screen from the afternoon sun, and the next day, the floor-to-ceiling windows had been fitted with automated blinds that adjusted to the light. I never asked for these things. They simply happened. I told myself I should be unnerved by this level of observation, this anticipation of my needs. But I wasn't. It didn't feel like being managed anymore. Felt like being seen. One rainy Saturday, I was curled in the new chair by the window, reading. He was on the other side of the room, speaking on the phone in quiet.